One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, folks. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. Super exciting week. We've got Mark Cranney on the podcast this week, which is amazing. The first thing we want to do, as always, is thank our sponsors. So we've got two, as we will have through the fall. The first is AirCall, a phone system designed for the modern sales team. AirCall seamlessly integrates into your CRM, eliminating data entry for your reps and providing you with greater visibility into your team's performance through advanced reporting. When it's time to scale, you can add new lines in minutes and use in-call coaching to reduce ramp time for your reps. Visit aircall.io/saleshacker to see why thousands of great companies like Dun & Bradstreet, Pipedrive, and Uber trust AirCall for their most critical sales conversations. And our second sponsor is Outreach.io, the leading sales engagement platform. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth. By prioritizing the right activities and scaling customer engagement with intelligent automation, Outreach makes customer-facing teams more effective and improves visibility into what really drives results. Hop over to outreach.io/saleshacker to see how thousands of customers, including Cloudera, Glassdoor, Pandora, and Zillow, rely on Outreach to deliver higher revenue per sales rep. So without further ado, let's listen to Mark Cranney, who is very, very well known. He's mentioned in The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, famous Silicon Valley CRO and VP of sales, and has built a number of companies well past the 100 million mark. Super honored to have Mark on the show, so let's take a listen. Hi, folks. Welcome to the Sales Hacker Podcast. It's your friendly neighborhood host, Sam Jacobs. I am really delighted and honored to share the microphone today with Mark Cranney, who a lot of us have read about and know about, but who may be new to some of you folks. So let me give Mark's quick background. He's currently the Chief Commercial Officer at SignalFx, but prior to joining SignalFx, Mark was an operating partner at Andreessen Horowitz, a Silicon Valley venture capital firm, over $6 billion under management, one of the more well-known and prestigious VCs, if not the most prestigious in the world. While he was at A16Z, Mark and his team advised and held boot camps for the portfolio on go-to-market best practices, and also brought in a network of CXOs and executives in the Fortune 500 Global 2000. And if you folks were listening earlier in the podcast, you know that we interviewed Jamie Buss from Zendesk, who worked for Mark for a good number of years. He's also held senior executive positions at Hewlett-Packard. He was also in the leadership roles at Opsware, which was chronicled in Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And he played football at Southern Utah University, so do not mess with him. Welcome, Mark, to the podcast.
Thanks, Sam, for having me.
We're delighted to have you. So I just gave a very introductory bio for you, but you have a long and a heralded and prestigious career in Silicon Valley. So it would be great from your perspective just to hear about your career, starting from, you graduated from Southern Utah playing football. Walk us through the however many years it was till you ended up at SignalFx.
Wow, that's a
long time.
But, yeah, I mean, I get this from the kids today that are coming out of college, just kind of walking them through why sales versus other options they have, coming right out of school. The reason I kind of picked it, I loaded up, jumped in a truck and drove to LA right out of school and essentially got in the office equipment business. And, the criteria for me is, where can I go? A, earn a lot of money, B, be in control of my own destiny and income, and C, where can I go get great training with, and kind of start my career with, under great coaches. I just kind of haven't grown up in a family business and having mentors, my old man and my uncles in a large family, farm and ranch in Idaho, and then going through kind of an athletic background in high school and college, just kind of understood the importance of, learning a system from the best. So I ended up working right out of school for a company called Harris 3M, which, is also a division called Lanier. It's, selling copiers right out of school. Is that down the street cold calling, like physical cold calling, not the, kind of cold calling you do, starting as an SDR. So that's how I got into it. I just kind of graduated up into medical device and equipment sales for several years. I got on the management path extremely quickly. I think I was only an individual contributor for a couple years in my career and led and managed teams. And then 1998, I happened to be up in Seattle doing a medical device and equipment startup. And there's all this internet stuff going on around me. And there's a company called PTC that had been stealing my guys for years. And I finally took their call, and a couple days later, I was, got hired by a guy named John McMahon at PTC, which is New England's largest software company, or it was at the time, and got back on that track again, just kind of progressing up, ended up running the Americas at PTC in Boston, moved out to Boston. And that's where Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen found me in early 2004. Recruited me out to to essentially build the field out for Opsware, and took that from up to 150 million in sales, and we ended up selling that to HP Software. So that's kind of the short version, not too short, but long. So
you mentioned that you were an individual contributor for only a couple years, and there's probably there are many, but there are a couple different phases of growth in somebody's career. There's being an IC, then there's sort of your first management experience, and then there's the management experience at the VP level. You're running bigger and bigger teams. But sometimes that first jump from individual contributor to manager is the most daunting. How did you figure out that you wanted to be a manager, and what were some of the tools, the tips, the strategies that you used to be successful in those first managerial days?
I would say the first things, as an IC you want to do is just, be a pro. I say this to my team all the time, and, be a pro, not a schmo. I mean, you're particularly early in your career, if you're a ball player, or if you're a great student, or you're in student government, coming out of school, I mean, you spend a lot of time practicing, drilling, and rehearsing. I see a lot of the younger crowd, they don't approach the job as as their profession. So, I mean, I just consumed tons of books on sales, on business. I've got stacks and stacks, even from some of the first ones. So, I mean, you really studying the game, be a student of the game, picking up mentors. As far as how I ended up down that path, it's just, mastered the jobs I've been in, whether it's the customers I was calling on and the solution, understanding the value, and then just a student of the game from a process standpoint, how to add value for customers and differentiate yourself. I think a lot of people don't really understand that, hey, it's not just the product that can set you apart, it's you, right? You are the big differentiator as an IC. And you have an ability, even as an individual contributor, to be in a leadership position, managing resources, getting the right resources and the right content and the right things in front of a prospect or a customer to move the chains. So mastering that first, and then you've got to enjoy, helping other people from a team standpoint, teaching, coaching. I mean, I always, if I hadn't gone into this path, I'd have probably ended up into coaching. That was a big fork in the road for me was, do I go into, coaching football or going down the sales path? And the thing I liked about the sales path is a place where I could get out every day and test myself and, get out and compete and measure up versus my competition. So
when you're thinking about building a team, what do you think the criteria is for, you mentioned there's a lot of discussion that playing college athletics is a really powerful prerequisite to being successful both in life, but specifically in sales. What do you think are the right criteria if somebody's out there trying to self-assess and figure out if they're going to be good at sales? What are the criteria that makes a successful salesperson?
I've got a pretty set criteria, and I love, an NCAA athlete. It's not a requirement by all means, and not all athletes are suited for this business. But a lot of junior military officers are great high level, as far as stepping stones, people that are extremely active in student government and things of those nature. But my criteria kind of falls in three buckets when I'm looking at an individual seller, and this goes way back. The first is, you want to look at their track record. I mean, that's the leading indicators are, past performance. And that's probably the easier thing to vet out in selecting talent. But the other ones are, digging into, kind of intellectual horsepower and EQ and things of that nature. But I really go hard on the what I call the character bucket. And the things I'm looking for are really success themes in people's backgrounds. And a lot of this starts before their resume. It's really in their upbringing, how and why they are, motivated by what they're motivated by, what's their golden spur. And it's the first one's probably where they rank from a courage standpoint. Do they have the courage to, kind of push through resistance, to take a little bit of a beating from, it could be a prospect, a customer, it could be running in someone's system. And then do they, how competitive are they? Are they competing? Do they really enjoy competition, getting up and being measured every day? And then things like focus and discipline. Do they have the focus and discipline to kind of really study and drill, practice, and get better on a day-to-day basis? In the athletic type background, junior military officer type background, that's already just there. It's just ingrained in them, and they've thrived in those environments. So it's just a good leading indicator. Other things like coachability, what's the work ethic? Where did they get that work ethic? I mean, I don't think you just wake up someday when you're 35 or 40 years old and have a work ethic. I think that's just, that starts, a lot earlier in life. And the last one's probably just, do they have empathy, right? One of the big things on the seller side that I look for is, do they have kind of the ability of putting themselves in the buyer's shoes and understanding what's going on in their world individually and as a company, and can they unpack that, and do they have the intellectual curiosity to figure things out? So those are kind of the high levels for an IC. And as you move up the chain from a leadership standpoint, you layer in, do they really enjoy leading and managing people and helping, coach them and seeing them succeed? That's kind of the, where things might start to break down, and IC might think they've got to go into management, but you really, a lot of them will pop up and go back down. People are wired differently. Some people enjoy, helping customers, and some people enjoy helping reps help customers, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So courage, how do you measure courage? Are there questions that you ask? Are there specific experiences that are demonstrative of that? I was struck by the use of that word.
Let's say there's different types of courage. If you're an SDR, do you have the courage to get some height and width in the account, right? Do you have the courage to push through? A lot of people on the call here would probably, recognize the challenger sell. Do you have it's really about pushing through resistance. And sometimes you have to go above, around, resistance. You have to address directly maybe an enemy in account, or you have to challenge a prospect or customer if you truly believe. And if you've done your homework, right, you're extremely competent with your value proposition. I mean, I've got this slide. It talks a lot about, getting competent, gives you confidence, which gives you the courage to do the right thing, to push through the resistance. So digging into that, when people have had setbacks, how do they get past it? And there's all sorts of different examples. Courage, like, jumping in a river and saving someone, that's a different type of courage than I'm talking about business or EQ type courage and pushing through resistance in the, from a seller standpoint.
You mentioned, going all the way back to childhood. Are there specific childhood experiences or backgrounds, even before you get to go to military school or you get to play NCAA athletics? Are there specific childhood experiences that you think are indicative sometimes of potential all-star performers?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody's has a story. I love hearing people's story. I mean, the kind of patented, let's start at school and do the chronological on your resume. I'll do that, and that's how I'll go tease through the track record piece and understand how they've ranked in their W-2s and what kind of training they've gotten. They coming from a system. But if you kind of understand somebody's upbringing, did they, was there a death in the family? I grew up. I tell a lot of people I was raised by wolves. Mother was killed in a car accident at a very early age. And, I was kind of raised by my old man and, a few grandmothers and my uncles, on a large family farm and business. And, you end up, growing up a lot quicker. That's my story. I love hearing other people's stories, how they're wired. That typically happens, earlier in life. And, it can happen later and people can change, but it helps too to kind of, if you do end up selecting that person, you kind of know what their golden spur is, what makes them tick, and which can be very valuable to manage them going forward and helping them and coaching them. And, the other big thing is, I try to look for, what are the strengths, not the weaknesses. And because a lot of times, the the weaknesses in somebody's background are extensions of their strengths, and it's tough to go fix weaknesses. And so hiring a strength versus weakness is another thing I try to focus on.
That makes sense. So, one of the things that we were chatting about offline is sort of the different criteria for being an IC versus a manager. You mentioned as a manager, you really need to want to help people. But what do you think when you think about the difference between sort of a frontline manager and a VP? What are the critical differences that separates whether you want to call it a CRO but a senior sales executive from a manager and sort of like all of the tiers below?
Yeah, so I've gotten this question a lot, at Andreessen Horowitz. I mean, it's essentially one of the big buckets responsibilities I had was advising CEOs and technical founders on building out their go-to-market. And as they, come in from a seed or an A and they're getting ready to scale and, they have to go do that first sales hire. And one of the ways I walk them through it is you really have three choices early on in a startup anyway. It could be first rev or it could be that, 0 to 10. It's going to be different than, 10 to 100 type scale. The first line manager, the first thing, they've got to have a great recruiting eye. They've got to have mastered the value proposition, the market, sales process, but they're probably somebody that's run in somebody else's playbook from a process standpoint, and they're great at executing. The difference between kind of the first, second line manager and somebody that can go put the whole thing together, that great CRO is somebody that could come in and they've really created from the bottoms up a playbook and the process at a very detailed level. And they know they've got the feel and the situational awareness to go, figure out when and where and how to go put things together. I mean, a good example is if I have a product, in the software game, right, and I need to go, am I going to go build a bottoms up motion? That's a lot of times is product specific. Like Jamie over at Zendesk. Zendesk was a kind of a bottoms up play, and she had a great SDR, inside sales background. She also had the scalability to and has had experience managing outside direct in territory dispersed sales forces. And how you go put that together. Do I go top down? I'm going to put the outside direct people in place first regionally and then back into the bottoms up play, or I'm going to put all three levels, major account organization, commercial sales, and then, small, medium business with, SDRs from a high velocity standpoint. That's probably the biggest difference is the playbook. Can they run in one? Running in somebody else's system versus putting it together, two completely different things. It's not that somebody else can't, but do they have that ability of doing it or not?
Yeah. And when you're thinking about and when you're advising some of these companies, I guess where do you fall out on, let's say they've got somebody that they think maybe the person's been a VP of sales once before or a highly effective early employee at the company. How do you help the CEO or the founder balance the tension? Some VCs are constantly wanting to put in, their favorite CRO that's done the 20 to 100 or whatever stage of growth that company's in. And then there are other CEOs that are willing to let senior executives grow into the roles that they're hired for. One of them that comes to mind on the marketing front is Nick Mehta at Gainsight, and he had this guy, Anthony Kanata, very early on, and now he's CMO, and they never sort of swapped him out for the more blue chip CMO. How do you think about helping founders evaluate when is the time for an outside hire on top versus letting the person that's in the role evolve into the role so that they can sort of make a few mistakes but write their own playbook?
Yeah, I mean, I love seeing the high potential grow into the role. The thing they bring to the table is knowledge of the solution, the value proposition, the customers, and the advising the founder or the CEO is one thing. A lot of it probably depends on them and what is their ability to essentially coach them up and help them grow, and where do they hit a wall. And one of the things I say is, look, if you've got a really technical founder that's just never scaled on the go-to-market side, then get some help. You're going to probably have help from your board, but reach out and build a team of advisors, that are best in class from a sales and marketing standpoint, or whatever the role is. Could be customer success, that can go help that executive grow. And then help you kind of as the founder, help you kind of assess, can they make the next level or not? So it's just so situational, and a lot of it depends on the hiring authority, what their skill set is. Getting help's probably the most important thing. Get another set of eyes on it, and if they can't make the leap, they can maybe move on to the next one. But I love seeing them, people grow in those roles. I got the opportunity to do it several times, and sometimes though you gotta go fast. You don't have time to let them grow. So
Yeah. I love seeing it too, self-servingly, of course. But so one of the questions I have is there's all these different frames of stages of growth. There's some people say 0 to 10, some people say 10 to 30, 20 to 50. What do you think, having done this so many different times, what are the natural breakpoints if you're thinking about it from an ARR perspective where things really do change and those ARR milestones do seem to be indicative of something shifting?
0 to 10 is probably the toughest, and where you're really trying to find that recipe to systematize. I think once you crack 10, I mean, the way I've always looked at it is, look, if I can figure out the 10, I typically can see the path to 100 from 10. Different people may look at it differently, and I think that's probably where the breakdown is. And then, having been in all the different phases from, 0 to, managing a few thousand people at complete scale, that helps dramatically because you know what needs to come next. And you've got that awareness of, the building blocks that need to be there. Getting up to that 100, I mean, look, when I blown by the 100 piece, I'm looking a billion, right? You can kind of feel that way. You do or you don't, but you can start to at least understand what needs to come next. Breaking it down into, the smaller buckets, I think, tougher. One of the things I think that's missing with a lot of CROs is the finance piece. They don't spend enough time on the ops and the finance and really building out the bottoms up type plan. And they end up, the CEO and the board and the CFO kind of hand them the plan. I mean, sometimes it's based on, how much they raised, right? That's the plan. And it might be a little aggressive. And I've seen a lot of CROs, VPs of sales get tipped over and whacked because they just took the bottoms down or the top down plan that was handed to them, and they didn't really spend enough time and thought, and they've gone into fiscal years metal on metal on a plan or underneath the plan. They didn't understand what the time to productivity ramps were. They didn't get granular enough on, look, it's going to take me longer to ramp up an outside direct sales force that's calling on the G2000 than it is, an inside seller selling. It might be 9 to 12 months for a fully ramped outside direct sales force, but the inside sellers might ramp it, 3 months or 4 months. And so you really got to pay attention and be the student of the game. Have a great, finance guys in your sales operations group, or in the early stages, you're doing it yourself. I mean, you're into the spreadsheet and you're really tweaking that productivity ramp. And then you're putting the package together. One of the biggest impacts, and there's another place where people fall down, is they kind of outsource the, training and enablement and the process piece. And they're not, customizing that to the uniqueness of their business. Because that's the biggest impact. A, hiring the right people. B, putting the right system in place, sales process, then training them up and shaving that cycle time to competency. I mean, getting people unconsciously competent at what they're doing, that gives them so much confidence. It gives them a ton of courage to push through resistance. And you'll see your productivity ramp quickly that way. That's one of the purposes of the boot camp, is to give these technical founders, here's what it looks like at scale on all these different levels, and here's the things you need to start putting into place, and here's kind of the criteria you need to be looking for in your executives as you layer in and build your company. So.
If everything else was equal, the pay, the equity opportunity, is there a stage for you that's more fun than the others? Do you love it at the, managing 3,000 people on the march to $1 billion, or are you kind of like a builder at the 0 to 10 stage?
I like the building. I like the first few months of, I go back to a year ago, last summer. I mean, literally on the whiteboard with the founders, really teasing out the value, putting I come with a playbook, right? But it's a customizable playbook. But the messaging, the how to do it at a very granular level, how to go step through a technical validation event and concurrently, build a business case, attacking all levels of an audience. understanding what the buying criteria should be for your customers. One of the things I think happens is, a lot of go-to-market execs, particularly in the startup world, they say, well, here's what the buying criteria is for, my customers. To simplify it, I try to break it down into 3 buckets. Executive level buying criteria is completely different than if you go down to the bottom, like the users of your solution, right? That's more feature function based. Executives is more business and strategy and initiative level type criteria. So putting an ROI type model in there to show value. The other thing people don't understand is, look, the customer, if it's new, right? Like in our space, there's this massive shift going on in the marketplace from an architecture standpoint to cloud native, right? What's the buying criteria? What should it be? It's our job to help our customers get there, and providing that value by here's what things you might want to look at as you move forward in your move to cloud native, and here's how we can help. The last thing we bring up is here's how we can help, from a solution standpoint. So that, I think that's super critical, is really crafting the message. And that's what I enjoy the most, is kind of figuring the thing out and then systematizing it, and then growing it, hiring the right people, training and developing them, and then seeing them have a big impact with their customers.
Tell us about SignalFx. If they've got you as chief commercial officer, there's obviously something super interesting going on. So tell us about that company a little bit.
Hey, look, I got the opportunity at my time at Andreessen Horowitz to, work with and look at and evaluate thousands of investment opportunities, and work with a ton of founders and teams that we invested in, particularly on the enterprise side. And so there's a genealogy story here. A lot of the crew at SignalFx, the founding team, there's 2 co-founders, Phil Liu and Karthik Rao, as our CEO. They were actually at LoudCloud. And when LoudCloud made they had the near-death experience, and they respun the company out as Opsware, an enterprise software company, from essentially a service provider, kind of AWS before AWS. Karthik ended up going and joining a young lady called Diane Green at this little company called VMware, and it was about $1 million in sales. And Karthik ran product for her through the IPO. Phil Liu stayed at Opsware, where I worked with him, and he was our chief architect. And he, after we got acquired by HP Software, he got recruited into this little company in Palo Alto called the Facebook. And
I've heard of Facebook.
Him and a lot of the engineering team went over there, and they essentially built and rebuilt the monitoring solution for internally at Facebook for several years, 2007 up to 2013, when Docker was released and this whole containerized environment started to take off. So Karthik and Phil got together then and co-founded the company. And Andreessen Horowitz, we invested in the A round. So I got a long run with these guys all the way back to essentially 2004 when I came out to the Valley. And the exciting piece is it's a huge market. The move to the cloud and public or private, is really accelerating. And what we built here is a real-time streaming analytics engine that helps customers get to these cloud native environments and see their infrastructure, their application, their APIs all in one view at lightning speed, which is, in this 4.9s economy where things are going, where companies are having to become software companies, it's pretty exciting. So that's what brought me off the bench, is just the size of market, the chance to kind of paint my own canvas from a go-to-market standpoint in what we think is going to be a really big, important company.
It's incredibly exciting. Question for you about A16Z and your time there. So you got, as a sales leader and a sales executive or a revenue executive, you have one set of skills, but you've also had the opportunity to work with, besides Ben and Mark, every other partner at Andreessen is one of the smartest people in their fields. So what are some of the lessons beyond sales and revenue that you learned from your time being around and directly working with so many of the brightest minds in investing, whether it's Ben Horowitz or Chris Dixon or anybody else?
Probably the biggest thing is, one of the probably core investment theses of the firm was, does the founding team, did they really, did they learn and earn a secret? I mean, kind of a secret that no one else really knew. And it wasn't always super obvious at first. In fact, the craziest ideas sometimes, a lot of times turn out to be the bigger outcomes from an investment standpoint. So being able to listen and really, dig in and tease out. It's like, Karthik and Phil, the founders of SignalFx. I mean, that whole team, the engineering team, they really learned and earned a secret at Facebook, and they're just so deep in it. I mean, it's a pros versus schmoes type thing. And my job, the biggest part of my job was there is, all right, how do you go, operationalize that and go to market? And then via this briefing program that I built, we would essentially reach out to the G2000, the senior executives across the world event, really, and offer them up access to curated innovation, to these startups that, would take them years, for these startups to get to these type of executives to build up enough sales and marketing muscle. I mean, we essentially shorten that. And or if from a customer standpoint, a CIO of a global 2000 or his or her team, what might take them years to kind of sort through what's coming next. They just weren't getting innovation like the old days. I mean, people used to buy innovation from the HPs and the IBMs of the world. Today, things are just happening so fast with cloud and social and mobile and all the technology shifts and the changing in business models. It's just, I just saw a lot in a short period of time. So yeah, I worked with a lot of smart people, a lot of people we invested in, but really connecting the two worlds, the Valley to the rest of the world from a business standpoint, it was a lot of fun. But I missed the granularity. I always missed the granularity of getting in and every day, waking up and I love the smell of napalm in the morning, going out and ask from a competitive standpoint. That's the thing I like the most. So I liked coaching and helping startups, but it always took longer, right? And there wasn't, I couldn't make them do anything. So that was the most frustrating part, but it was a lot. It did give a lot of it was a lot of satisfaction. Work with some great companies, guys like the team over at Okta. I mean, it put a lot of the sales leadership in there. I mean, they went public a year and a half ago, and $5 billion valuation now. I mean, companies like that were fun to work with. GitHub crew was tough to work with. They had this culture problem, right? Or I viewed it as a problem. They didn't want to screw up their engineering culture. And it was like, guys, I mean, you can have two cultures. I mean, the most important culture is the culture of winning, right? And getting your solution out to the market. And, you've got to, get out in front of the customers. You're going to have to drop people into territories and, put the sales guys on another floor. The engineers want to win too, right?
That is a debate I have had so many times, and you and me are on exactly the same page. I think a lot of founders don't process that you can have more than one culture, and that the kind of person that's going to be a really successful salesperson, they might need a bell to go off every time a new opportunity is created or a sale is closed. And if that annoys the engineers, then have them in two different rooms. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I joined at Opsware, within the first week, there was a cube company, right? So some people might find this hard to believe, but I can be a little loud. And I had an engineer walk over. I was on the phone with a prospect, and actually I had a guy named Grant Wilson with me. He runs Force Management, a great sales training and enablement company. We worked together at PTC. And as listen to, I wanted him to kind of hear what the customer was saying. And the engineer comes over and says, "Hey, can you hold it down? We're trying to write some code in here." And I clicked on the mute button. They said, "Hey, mother blankety blank blanker, if we don't get this deal, you're not going to have a job. Get the free," it was a little uncomfortable. Actually, he's at SignalFx right now. He still tells that story. So a few days later, board mandate, Cranney gets his own office. It was a conference room, but I was the first to have an office. And, we ended up, moving to a different floor pretty quickly. So
I get it. I understand. A few last questions. First of all, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And it's just an honor to get to chat with you. One question I have is, what's changed? You've been doing this such a long time, or I don't mean to say that in maybe that sounded like, yeah, you're not that old. You're still young. You're young at heart, but things have changed, and particularly because even though you were advising startups at A16Z, I'm sure that you're in it right now, and there's probably specific tactics, specific tools that are different than the last time you were formally the head of sales or the head of revenue. So what stood out to you as some of the biggest changes in the sales world from now versus maybe 10 or 15 years ago?
Oh, I think, a lot's changed. The tools, right? The power of the user, the bottoms up type sell, I think, and the growth marketing pieces changed. The customers are just armed with way more information prior to the reach out. So I think ABM is super important. Attacking your target markets from a bottoms up standpoint as well as top down, kind of putting all three of the audiences together. The CXO, different criteria versus VPs, and selling laterally across multiple functions of the business, and then the bottoms up, getting to the bottoms up, the users, because and the tech is just so much better, right? So in some cases, it's changed. The tooling is changed from a CRM and marketing automation standpoint. I looked at hundreds of solutions over there. I still, we're constantly tweaking them here, the access to customer information. But the biggest thing is just the power and knowledge that the buyer has. And then, how do you help enable the seller? How does a marketing organization enable the seller? And, the advantage I have here is running sales, marketing, and customer success is really being able to take the iron out and just flatten everything. See, I don't have like three functions that are pointing fingers at each other. I just get the iron out and wrap people upside the head. And we, it's one system, right? Being able to view it, the customer journey is as one big customer journey. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. It sounds incredibly exciting. I have a specific question for you, just in the enterprise sales world. Do you guys do POCs at SignalFx? And there's a bit of a debate, or at least there's a debate in my world, about whether you should charge for the POC before moving to a full production environment. What's your point of view there?
Ooh, I love that one. I don't know if I want to give my, because this kind of gets into my, the hardcore IP, but absolutely here. I have such a devastatingly powerful product. And that's one of the most exciting things. And one of the reasons I joined is I really like the product, the impact it can have with our customers. I want to do a POC. If I go in side by side, no one can beat me. Absolute, devastatingly will kick anybody's ass if we can get the customer to put it in. And I want to do a big one. And I will treat the POC like a production deployment, like we're deploying it. So absolutely.
Do you charge for the POC though?
In some cases we will. If we can, typically what we'll do is we get executive alignment up front that, if we go through it, we're going to treat it like a production deployment. And, we're going to, when we get down the path, we're going to concurrently start working on commercials. We're going to concurrently, as we're checking the boxes from a criteria standpoint, we're working on a business case for the executives, and we're going to put it in production for you. And you're not going to want to turn it off. You're not going to want to. Why would go waste the time? Let's just go put it in production. Yes, bring in the competition. Absolutely, side by side. We will kick their ass. So I love it.
I love it. Yeah, my perspective is pretty similar to yours. Sometimes there's going to be companies that are asking for a POC, and it's sort of like, yeah, we would love to see a pilot and see what happens. And my mandate is, well, there has to be a path to production. We don't do POCs for their own sake. We do it in the context.
A lot of it's just putting a barbell around it. We do unpaid POCs for this time frame, and here's the check to the box. If you want to go beyond that, then it's really, there's a difference between a POC and a paid pilot, right? If you want to go longer than that and you want to do soak tests and stuff like that are beyond, what we think, needs to happen, then, absolutely move it up to a paid pilot. So I think it's a situational. It depends on your tech, depends on where you're at, how hard it is to get deployed for customers. I don't think one answer fits all the boxes. I think it really is situational.
Yeah, makes sense. There's a section at the end here where I basically just like to pay it forward and figure out either people that have worked for you that you think we should know about, or books that you've read that you think we should be reading. But who are, as they say in the commitments, who are your influences?
Wow. I was hired by, PTC. Look, coaching trees are super important to me. I mean, the talent that came out of PTC, the numbers of VPs of sales all over the place are phenomenal. There's a lot more Boston. It's a lot more Boston DNA, but there's a lot of them out here. John McMahon, he does a ton of advising in boards right now. He hired me at PTC, and then we ended up squaring off and went to battled. He was at Blade Logic when I was at Opsware. That was super fun for me because, he was good. I mean, his whole team was good. and we went to war. That was probably the funnest I had. Jamie Buss, who you've had on the program, I think is a phenomenal talent. I don't know if I was really prepared for this one.
That's okay.
Force management, if you're a CRO and you need some help putting a package together, the force management, they're out of North Carolina. They have a playbook. They can, it's called, the big one is the most popular is command of the message. Hardcore sales process, the forecasting process with Medic, they can put that in for you in a customized fashion. If you don't have the time or the ops and the sales enablement and training chops to do it and or people to do it, you can't wait. I would follow those guys' blog. John Kaplan and Grant Wilson over there are phenomenal talent. Some of my favorite people.
Is there a sales book that you think or books that you either, like something that's had a big impact on you over the last couple of years, like something like Spin Selling, or something that you've read recently that you think has some interesting nuance?
I read a lot of them. The problem is with the readers now, I can never remember the names of them. But Steve Martin, the author Steve Martin, Heavy Hitter Selling, it's a little more tech and enterprise software focused. He's wrote 2 or 3 that I really am a fan of. I don't know if they're still, if he's really a big bestseller. I've been spending a lot more time on the marketing side lately, on the growth marketing side. But, I'm going back all the way, the Zig, I can go all the way back to, you dated me, but the Zig Ziglars and the, I got stacks of the books. So
yeah.
Be a pro, not a schmo is the big, be a student of the game is what I suggest with everybody, consume this data, study, practice, drill, rehearse. The sales, if you want to be an aspiring sales manager, there's a lot of great management books as well. So.
Very good. Last question. I'm assuming you guys are growing at SignalFx. If folks want to reach out to you, or first of all, are you open to that? And second of all, what's the best way to do it?
Email mark@signalfx.com. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Maybe not.
All the usual channels. Yeah. And are you guys building out and are you hiring?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're hiring all levels, all the seller positions we're hiring for, SDRs, just phenomenal talent we're getting, inside sellers, the commercial teams, even the hybrid guys. I love, the inside seller, SDRs are coming in and they're getting in the field, or they're getting to quota carrying roles pretty quickly, and we're starting to push them out to hybrids fairly quickly. We're also hiring the heavy hitter, 10, 15, 20-year major account type reps that can walk the halls of the global 50, Fortune 500 type accounts. So absolutely, you back in New York, we can't find enough back there right now. So
very good.
We're hiring in Europe as well as Asia. So
Mark@signalfx.com. Folks will reach out to you.
All right.
Thanks. Mark, thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
All right. Have a good one. See you.
Bye. Hey, everybody, it's Sam's Corner. We just continue to get amazing guests here on the Sales Hacker podcast. And Mark Cranney is somebody that a lot of people know his name, and he's featured very prominently in The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And now he's Chief Commercial Officer at SignalFx, and he's a guest on the Sales Hacker podcast. So lucky us. That was awesome. Just a quick, interesting point that Mark made that I really strongly agree with. I've had this debate so many times with my bosses, typically the CEO or the founder, about it's a product-driven company and there's a group of engineers. And so they say, well, we don't want a bro culture, a bro meaning, I guess, it's like super masculine sales team that's sort of chest bumping or something like that. And so there's a lot of dismissiveness and a lot of disparagement sometimes around celebration, particularly on the sales team. And what I try to convey to people that I work with, particularly CEOs, is these are different cultures and sales teams need to be motivated and people need to celebrate. What we do is really, really hard. We hear no most of the time. I always say that if you hear no 7 out of 10 times, you're an all-star. And if you hear no 9 out of 10 times, you're fired. And that is the life of a salesperson. And so when we do get that win, when we do get that signed contract, I think it's okay to celebrate. I think it's okay to use something like a Level 11 or a Ambition.io or a Hoopla and, have a sound go off and have a celebration go off and have a celebratory GIF. But it's okay to celebrate and high five and make some noise. And if that means that there are 2 different cultures, but all of them aligned around winning more broadly, then that's important and that's okay. And if you're out there and you're a founder building an amazing product with a great group of engineers, that's awesome, and we celebrate you. But just understand that it takes a village. It takes a lot of different types of people to build a company, and let's make sure that we empower the salespeople on the team, whatever gender, race, ethnicity, age, wherever they're from, whoever they are, let's empower them to celebrate those wins, because what we do is really, really difficult. So with that, I'm sure some folks out there are nodding their heads in agreement. I'll leave you with that. This has been Sam's Corner. I'll talk to you soon.
To check out the show notes, see upcoming guests, and play more episodes from our incredible lineup of sales leaders, visit saleshacker.com and head to the podcast tab. There you'll find the Sales Hacking Podcast on iTunes or Google Play. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your peers on LinkedIn, Twitter, or elsewhere. If you want to get in touch with me, I think the best way is LinkedIn. So that's linkedin.com//SamFJacobs. Once again, a huge shout out to our sponsors, AirCall, which is your advanced call center software, complete business phone and contact center, 100% natively integrated into any CRM, and Outreach, a customer engagement platform that helps efficiently and effectively engage prospects to drive more pipeline and close more deals. I'll see you next time.